Mr. Swinger One here. Hello, welcome back to the channel. We are at about mid-January already. I believe today's the 14th. I do have a March 1st deadline to have the crank and pistons installed in this. I'm just out here. What I'm at. I wire wheeled the caps. There's a video on that. I wipe everything down with WD-40. And I'm test fitting. So I've already noticed there's a problem with that main bolt. It's going in and it's binding up. So I'm going to chase that hole with a tap. And I'm going to actually chase the bolt with a die. I do have the tools because I was in the business. Some of my videos you see a Snap-on box. It does have tools in it. I did retire from the business, but I never sold my tools because nobody really is buying tools. And I'm still using them, playing around with my own stuff, maintaining my own cars. But I rounded up the bolts for the windage tray. I believe I'm going to make a video about the windage tray. We're going to talk about that. We're going to look at it, talk about what it's for. It is specific to the 340. That is another 340 specific piece, so I will talk about that because I do want to point out the differences along the way between 318s and 340s. I know people love the 318, but the 318 is not a 340. It looks like a 340, but it's not, and there's quite a few reasons why it's not, and I'm going to try and cover them along the way. Yeah, so I did locate the bolts, the windage tray. I'm trying to use factory correct stuff. I do not want to have a bunch of grade 5 Lowe's hardware in this engine. This is basically, to me, this is a restoration. I'm basically trying to restore this 340 back to what it would have been in 1970. That's why I didn't want to go over, I don't want to overbore it. I want to try to have the most realistic experience with an original 340 that I can get out of this build. I wouldn't mind having a 68 340 4-speed cam. That may or may not happen. I do not know. I do have a Summit SUM K6901 cam. I run that cam in the 340. It's in the car. It sounds good. It revs nice. A lot of the things with these engines is the throttle response. They were originally touted as revving 6,000 RPM all day long. That was the claim with the 340. The horsepower, the high RPMs. At the time, a street car going over 5,500 RPM, that was getting up there. If you get around 6,000 RPM with a regular engine, it may not make power there, and it also may grenade. So these engines were built for that. They were built to rev at 6,000 RPM all day long. That was what was in the brochures at the dealer back then. So yeah, that's where we're at. The main caps need to go on. Numbered 1. Let's see if you can see the numbers. I'm going to spin around here. Try to get a better view. This engine's upside down. This is the driver's side of the engine over here. So the main caps have number 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you have the oil seal, rear main seal, rear main cap. That's self-explanatory. There's a number on it, but there's no number 5 on it. So a little bit of information here with these engines. The main cap should stay with the block, and because they are line board together. So if you buy one of these engines, or a 318, 360, or 273, whatever, small block Mopar LA, and the main caps, say you have 2 number 2s, it's possible the caps are from another engine and they are mixed up. What will happen is you'll bolt them down and your crank won't turn, or it'll turn real hard because of a misalignment in the bores, the main bearings. And the same thing would happen if you put these on with the numbers over on the passenger side of the block. If you put this on upside down, the crank could bind up. And you'll know when you go together, there's signs like, okay, the crank don't turn, what's wrong? And you'll go back and double check. Can you use mixed main caps? Yes, but I would recommend you have the block a line board. That is where they bolt all these caps on. They run a bore a boring machine up through, and they true the bore up. That's just a little information on that. That's off the top of my head. That's what I remember from building these engines. I'm not reading it out of a book or anything. I could be wrong, but if I had an engine with two number 2 main caps, that would stick out to me like, okay, I got mixed up main caps here. Now, does that mean it don't work? Maybe the guy before line bored it. So you'd bolt your crank up with the bearings and see how it turns. And there's a spec for that. There is a spec for the breakaway torque of how much torque it should take for the crank to turn with the main caps and the bearings all torqued down with proper clearances. And we will get into that along the way too. All right, so as you see, these are our factory correct windage tray bolts. They go into one of our 4 special main cap bolts here. So I had to acquire these off the internet. I was lucky enough that there's a guy out there that has this stuff. Well, he has a lot of it. I bought quite a few bolts off of him already. So yeah, we have the factory correct windage tray bolts. For our windage tray, which as you can see is a mess, so I'm going to keep it away until I can clean it up. And we're going to get into what this does here in another video. You can see the slots there, and it basically goes over the crank and keeps the oil from slinging off the crankshaft throws. We'll get into that more in detail in another video. But yeah, that's it. It's a lot of wiping down with WD, cleaning and polishing. It's getting to where I'm starting to like it. There's a couple more things I want to do, but okay. So we're going to go ahead and install our main bearings now. What I did was I took one of those blue disposable shop towels. I wiped the WD-40 out of the main saddle, and then I hit it with brake clean. We're going to get our top halves in. The top halves are going to have the holes in them for the oil passages. So we're going to go ahead and get them in. This is our number 3 main. It is the thrust bearing. So this goes where your number 3 cap is. So the bearing will say it has a date 11 of 2019 upper, and then 10 thousandths. That means this crank has been machined 10 under on the mains. So at this point, you should have mic'd your crank, ordered your bearings accordingly, according to the size of your micrometer. There's a little notch on the bearing, and that goes into the hole right there. I have wiped all this with brake clean. This is like non-oily now. The bearing is non-oily. This is going together dry. The crank will go in dry. We'll plastic gauge, and that's it. You plastic gauge first, then you would pull the crank and lube everything up with assembly lube, drop it in. So you see how that bearing just popped right into place there. Make sure your oil holes are lined up. That's one of the bearings in. So the bearings in the block will have an oil hole. The bottom bearing will be smooth. Main thing is to make sure your notches are lined up and your oil holes lined up with the holes in the block. I had these bearings installed before in a mock-up, so there's a little bit of white assembly lube in the groove. I'm going to clean all that out. So if you're noticing that, that's why. These bearings weren't ran before, but they were installed in the engine. Yeah, and they fit snug like a press fit. And at some point, we'll have to do the rear main seal really soon. There's the rear main bearing, and then we can pop the other halves in the caps, wipe everything down, drop the crank in, plastic gauge, check the clearances, and we're there. I do have my old Crane SSH 320 cam in there, just for mock-up purposes. I'm not running that cam. I'm thinking about sending it out to get polished and basically restored. But yeah, you see a cam in there. That's not the final cam. That's like for mock-up. All right. Yep. There's the mains. Top halves of the mains installed. All right. So here we got our crank setting in here. The bearings have all been installed. The caps. Everything is wiped. The WD's wiped off the bearing surface. So the crank's sitting in there dry. The next step is to plastic gauge the mains. So I will plastic gauge the mains. I'm going to save that for another video. But then the crank's going to come back out. Everything's going to get assembly lube. We got to install the rear main seal. There is more to go in this bottom end in terms of the oil pump, the windage tray, the oil pump pickup. But I have the crank setting in here now, basically ready to be plastic gauged. The bearings are dry. So at this point, you wouldn't spin your crank, even by hand, because it might, you know, you're going to have a metal-to-metal contact with your bearings. It might put, you know, minor scratches in them. So don't spin your crank dry on dry bearings. Wait till you put the assembly lube on, then you can spin it all you want. But that's where we are. I think it looks good. The crank was sent out. It was $250 to get machined. I believe it was 10 under on the mains, 20 under on the rods. I got the right bearings for it. We mic'd it. In another video, I showed the miking, how to mic it. And yeah, that's the only thing I'll do is I'll put the oil pan on it to cover everything up. And I'll put 4 bolts in that. And then I will put a trash bag over the whole thing. So I've been keeping oil on the boards, trying to fight rust. This stuff will flash rust this time of year. And till next time will be plastic gauge and the rear main seal. I'm going to save that for another video. Here we have another look at the crank from the top. Installed. Try to see if we can. Looking good. It's actually looking clean. Cleaner than what you think cleaning it up at home. There's a lot of wiping, rubbing, honing, sanding, scotch brighting. But yeah, the crank's in there. It's not final installed. It's just sitting in there with snugged up bolts on the mains. The crank itself has been machined. I think I said that already. But yeah, I'm going to plastic gauge it. Next day I come out here, I'm going to plastic gauge it. Install the rear main, lube up the caps, torque them down. And then the only thing after that's dropping the pistons in the holes. That might be an afternoon's worth of work. So I think my deadline for March 1st is looking doable. But I'm in no hurry. I don't want to miss any details. We're going to get into checking the crankshaft end play. I'll show you how to do that. There's checks along the whole process. So the plastic gauge is checking oil clearance of the mains. Then you got to check the end play of the crank, because the crank should have some end play front to back against the thrust bearing. But we'll get into that into another video. But yeah, for now we're getting there. I spent a few hours on it today. Probably 3 or 4 hours. And I got to the point where I'm like, I may as well just drop the crank in. You know? Can't really get it much more cleaner. So, it's getting there. Looking good. Alright.